Good day, everyone. Today is the continuation of the bottom of my coffin that I'm making. I decided to show you about cutting tape on this. I would say after going through this, because I don't usually cut tape, probably it's best to do it while they're still on the pegboards. That way you've got a little bit of space underneath the tape for your blade. I had a little bit of trouble while I was cutting this because I was cutting on the tape that was flat on the foam board there, so it was a little weird. But here I just cut it away, and then after that I get to the ironing. I was cutting while my iron was heating up. When I did this video, I was just using a clothing iron, which is what I had used for many years. And then shortly after this was made, my iron actually quit working. So that was really rough on me. But I ordered a Cricut mini press, and I have loved that ever since then. I got a new iron before I got the mini press just because I didn't know if I wanted the mini press, if it was going to be worth the cost. And I ended up finding a good deal on it, so I went ahead and just bought it, and I haven't looked back. I love that little thing. It has caused me to have much more consistency when I'm ironing products. And that's really been so helpful. But here we will finish the cutting of the tape, and then we'll move forward with ironing. So here I am getting ready to iron, and before I do that, I just wanted to take one last look at everything, make sure all of my beads are lined up where they are supposed to be so that they don't get ironed in the wrong places, especially for something that you're fitting together. This is a 3D piece, so I definitely don't want anything to be out of place. And then I was kind of looking at the flower bud, I suppose you would call it, and decided that I wanted to make a couple little adjustments to the colors and where the colors are placed. So you'll see me just make a couple little quick changes here before I iron. So here I have my parchment paper. There are different kinds of paper that you can use. I have used perler paper in the past. I've used the roll of perler paper, and I've used the folded up pieces that come with a lot of kits. I definitely do not like the folded up ones because either they will leave creases, like crease marks on the melted beads, or they will need to be ironed out. And I have found that when I iron out a piece of perler paper, I end up having it get staticky, and sometimes that can stick to beads and cause beads to move out of place from where they are supposed to be, and that causes mayhem. So I just get regular parchment paper from the grocery store, and that's what I'm using here. I'm gonna leave this at its original speed for you because I wanted you to see just how long it can take sometimes for this. I don't usually do a full melt on my beads. I like to just melt it enough that I can see that they are stuck together, and you can still kind of see through it. That's the way that I prefer. Some people like to melt it all the way. Some people like to melt it a little more than what I do. It's just up to you and your preference. If you are melting something all the way and you have taped it, you need to poke holes in the tape. And I will do that just by taking an empty pegboard and pressing down really, really hard on that tape to create holes in the back. Otherwise, you will wind up with a mess of beads if you're melting them all the way. Since I don't melt them all the way, I don't worry about poking holes in the tape. And you see, as I'm ironing here, I've got books nearby. I keep heavy books, textbooks usually, close by when I'm doing a large project so that I can put it on the hot melted beads right away. That way I keep my project from curling up as it's cooling and I'm still working on other areas of the thing. Usually you can iron the entire project and then just put it under something heavy like a book. But in a case like this, you've got to have those right next to you in arm's reach so that you can put them on there as you go. And then you'll notice as I go through this video that I'm moving the book, and then I eventually add a second book to what I'm doing. Another point that I should have mentioned earlier, for this iron that I was using, I keep the heat for my bead projects that are in regular size beads at about slightly over, just a smidge over half. I wanted to note though, for my Cricut mini press, I use full heat. It's got 3 heat settings on it, and for regular sized beads, I used full heat on the 3rd level, and then mini beads, I use the 2nd level for the Cricut mini press. I did, when I was still using this iron, for mini beads, I still used the same amount of heat. It just went much more quickly. Hardly any amount of time spent for mini beads with this iron. So here I've kind of finished my original go around, and then I just kind of move everything out of the way and go back over everything one more time just to make sure that I've got all of my beads fused together before I leave it. And then once I'm finished, I leave it to cool for a little while before I come back. So now it has cooled for a little while and I turned my iron back on, so it's ready to be flipped over and have the tape removed. And you'll notice a little bit of shiny stuff there. I'm not actually sure why it looks like that. It didn't look like that to my eye when I took it off. It actually kind of looks like these beads are moved out of place, but they're not. They're perfectly fine. So then I gently flip it over and I grab the tape from under the beginning of where I did, because I overlap my tape. So if I start taking it off in the same place where I started putting it on, then it makes it a little easier. The tape will stick to itself. And you can see I'm going slowly and gently, making sure that no beads are coming up. And I press my hand on the project as I move along to keep those beads from pulling up with the tape. And I just slowly, carefully go through and pull off anything that might have gotten stuck and isn't quite fused as well as it's supposed to, like that little piece right there under my thumb. And then I make sure I remember that for when I iron this side, because I will pay special attention to that spot and fuse that side a little better than I may have done. Okay, so the tape is off and I've got, I think it was 3 or 4 beads that popped out of place. So those will need to be front and center in my mind, like I said, so that I can make sure that I'm fusing those to where they are supposed to be and paying extra special attention. You'll notice that I actually ripped off a little piece of tape there, which is how I'm going to help myself so that I can get those beads where they're supposed to be. On a bigger project like this, it makes sense for me to put a little piece of tape underneath where on the side that I've already fused and just stick that bead in place so that I can fuse it in place where it's supposed to be when I iron this side. And I just remembered that this actually did not go at all very well. You might be able to see a little bit. There's a crack right by where my fingers are, and some of the beads fell out and started piling underneath the whole thing. So I had to get all of those out and put them back where they belonged. I did this a couple of months ago, and I completely forgot that there was all this chaos while I was trying to iron it. But it just goes to show that, you know, sometimes things get messed up and you just do your best to fix it and move forward and block it out of your memory. Okay, so it's finally ready for me to do the other side. I will mention that part of the reason I didn't iron the first side very much was because I didn't want to iron it too much. And the iron that I was using was new and I wasn't super familiar with it. So I didn't know how much heat was going into those beads, and I didn't know how consistent the heat was across the heat panel of this iron. So I was really kind of getting to know it, and that's part of the reason that I was not super successful with the first side of this. But what I ended up doing with this coffin was I put sides on it. I made 8 sides. There's one across the top, one across the bottom, one on each side, and then the diagonal sides each had their own plate, and they were all about 1 bead plate tall. And then I stuck all those together and I glued them all together, and I am using those to hold my bead plates now. And I don't move it very often because I don't want it to break or anything like that, but I just glued it together with hot glue with a little help from my boyfriend, and it holds my bead plates just fine, and it looks super pretty. So you can see here that I'm doing pretty much the exact same thing that I did with the first side. I put the parchment paper down, I have my books in arm's reach, and I'm just going through slowly with small circles and ironing until I can see that those beads are touching each other and pressed together, melted together through the parchment. I can usually see when the beads start to melt, they will press up against the parchment paper, and you can kind of see them more easily than you could before. And then as you go, when you're close up to it, you can see that they're starting to melt together. And you can kind of pay attention to how quickly that's happening and pay attention to the whole surface area that you're working with. And you can see when it's getting to the point that you like it, and you can tell if you're being consistent or not as you go. I'm close to finished here, but one thing I wanted to mention, I didn't use different kinds of beads here, but there are different kinds of beads. There are clear beads, there are glow-in-the-dark beads, there are glittery beads, and the ones that are a little more clear, a lot of times melt at a different rate than ones that are not, like these beads here. These beads are all the same kind of beads, so they melted the same. But that's one thing that I have to pay attention to, is that if I'm mixing some clear beads in or some glow-in-the-dark beads in, I've got to pay attention and make sure that I'm not ironing too long in those spaces so that I don't have over melting or an inconsistent melt. And here I'm all finished and it's all cooled down. I've put away my iron and let this sit and cool for quite some time. And I came back and grabbed it and picked it up, removed the tape, and I just kind of gently test to make sure that everything is solidly together. I just wanted to make sure that nothing is going to pop off. Sometimes when I have beads that pop loose, I will actually go back and iron that first side again in those spots just to make sure that they're good and they're going to stay. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it is helpful for you, and I hope that you take care of everyone around you, especially yourself.